Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Timurid Empire survived. The Timurid Empire was not really a nation per se, but holds the name of an important person, Timur, also known as Tamerlane. In this video I will refer to him as Timur. Timur was a Turco-Mongol general who was born in modern-day Uzbekistan. He is considered to be one of the greatest commanders in history, and there are claims that he was undefeated. His empire stretched from modern-day Central Asia to Iran, Mesopotamia, and he even had campaigns all the way into Syria, Anatolia, Egypt, and even China. He may have been a very talented general, but he was responsible for great depopulation around the world. Around 5 to even 10% of the people died during his time. He ordered each soldier to bring 2 decapitated heads from Baghdad, and of course they ran out of people whom they should kill. Many people, they were enslaved and whole districts were depopulated and they collapsed. The problem with Timur's end of the reign was that the ones whom he appointed as successor were outlived by himself. Thus the empire had a big problem once Timur died. In his deathbed, Timur appointed Pir Muhammad as his successor, but with all the intrigues and rivalries going on, he wasn't able to impose himself. Shah Rukh gained power after 6 years of civil war in 1409. But by that point, the Timurid Empire started its decline. Karakoyunlu was able to beat and push the Timurids back from Mesopotamia and even from many parts of Persia. While it is true that the dynasty survived in Central Asia and later on in India as the Mughal Empire, the Timurid Empire ceased to exist by 1500, when most was conquered by Karakoyunlu and the Uzbeks. So what if all of that changed? What if the Timurid Empire survived? Let's discuss a few points of divergences here. We could take the point of divergence that Karakoyunlu would be completely conquered by Timur, or that they would just never rise. But if we do that, then the civil war within the Timurid Empire would still happen and someone else may rise in the west and threaten the Timurid Empire. Maybe not Karakoyunlu, but perhaps the Ottoman Empire or an Armenian state, or Georgia, perhaps another random general. The best point of divergence would be that Timur declares Pir Muhammad way before his death as a successor, and as a result of it, he could have more support. Sure, some people may rebel or try to overthrow him. This happened very frequently. But at least we would not get a civil war of like 6 years. As a result of this, Karakoyunlu may actually be stopped or even be completely annexed. With that said, Pir Muhammad would be able to focus on the Ottoman Empire. Timur recently concluded alliances with the not Yuan dynasty against Ming. Karakoyunlu would be no problem in that timeline, and India was most of the time conquered by outsiders, so India would probably not be a problem for the Timurids. Pir Muhammad would push the same narrative as his grandfather, that they would be the successor of the Seljuks, who should rightfully rule over Anatolia. They would also sponsor different factions within the Ottoman Empire, and we may see a collapse resulting from that. The Timurid Empire would become the strongest Muslim power in the world, while the remnants of the Ottoman Empire would be divided between Serbia, Bulgaria, and Byzantium. Would Pir Muhammad care for Constantinople? That's difficult to say, but the Timurids would probably fight against the Mamluks at first. During the succession of Pir Muhammad and the moment of weakness in the Ottoman Empire, the Mamluks would try to expand in one way or another. Now that the Timurids were able to rule over a large chunk of Anatolia, they would go again for the Mamluk Empire. Maybe they could try to beat them until the Egyptian heartland, but they will surely take most of the territories around Syria and even Palestine or even Sinai. The bad thing about it is that the Timurids would probably devastate again many cities and regions, and after beating the Ottomans, now the Mamluks, Pir Muhammad would also come close to a high body count. We don't know how many people he might have killed, but it is possible that also Pir Muhammad would be able to rival his own grandfather. This would set the Middle East once again a few years back, and it would be a huge handicap for the whole region and even the world. Another problem that Pir Muhammad would need to address would be the relations between him and the Ming dynasty. For Ming China, the Timurid Empire was just a vassal, but Pir Muhammad would probably want to change those relations and follow his grandfather's footsteps. The alliances between them and the Mongol tribes would not be broken or dissolved, and we could see a huge war happening in China. Especially Western China, Turkestan would suffer a lot from it, but it is difficult to predict whether China will collapse earlier or fall completely to the Timurids, or whether Pir Muhammad would crown himself to become Emperor of China. I would say that they would not fall to the Timurids, and they would also probably still remain independent, but we could see some splits happening or some civil war within China. Maybe another Mongol dynasty would arise in China instead of a Chinese one, and the Chinese, they would be forced to revise the relations between them and the Timurids. This will have a huge implication for China, because China would find itself vulnerable in the West, and while China was mostly a closed-off country, they would need to push for reforms, and we may end up seeing a more expansionist China even after some time. The wall of China would still be there and upgraded, but also the army, the technology, the navy, the infrastructure would now be upgraded as well. And even if a Mongol would rule again over the Chinese, due to the competition for resources, China would be at odds with the Timurids at some point. There is a possibility that the Timurids could even push further in India, Egypt and so on, but at some point the Timurids would have absorbed so many different peoples and cultures that it would become very difficult to rule over such a vast empire. The successor of Pir Muhammad in this alternate timeline may become a ruler who would focus on the internal issues, while defending its empire from the outside. He would still do certain lands, but something akin to the Timurid Renaissance would happen, and Samarkand would become even more important than it was in OTL. With the knowledge from far-reaching lands, even touching Byzantium, Egypt, China, and parts of India, Samarkand could become and stay for much longer a center of knowledge. It could become a second Baghdad in that timeline. Trade would be coming in, the economy would be booming as well. Less people would be killed under the successor of Pir Muhammad as well. Central Asia would be more pacified, more stable, also more Persianized. And people would also settle. We would have less nomads in there. The Caucasus could be more Islamized, while the Balkans would probably escape Islamization. Byzantium would not really see a revival, but we may see a struggle between Serbia, Hungary or Bulgaria. Hungary would have the best cards to become a great power in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. India would never see the rise of the Mughal Empire and stay, again, very disunited. It's very likely that the Europeans would be able to take more lands directly and sponsor more proxy wars. India would not just fall under the British Empire, but rather be divided between the Timurids in more internal parts, and the coastal areas would go mostly to the European powers. China would be the wild card in here. Either China would reform itself, expand and have a chance of beating the Timurids and later on kicking off the Europeans, or they would collapse again and become very Sinocentric. As for Russia, Russia would still grow and expand into Siberia, and they would even become the main rival of the Timurid Empire for some time, and the fights over Central Asia would result in very big wars. It would cost Russia a lot of resources and manpower to take wars in there. Sweden or Poland, Lithuania would be able to take advantage from that situation, but I don't think that Russia would just disappear completely. Perhaps Polish partitions they could be avoided, Sweden may as a result of it become a great power, but it's very sure that Central Asia would not be easily taken by Russia and even not be taken at all by the Russians. Instead, the Timurid Empire would defend its heartland around Samarkand with all they've got, and the Russian dream of a port in the Wan Sea would never be fulfilled in his timeline. The Timurid Empire could take the place of Persia or Iran, or even an Ottoman Empire in some way or another, but a very Turkish Persia, or very Persianized Ottoman Empire, and one that stretches from Anatolia, Sinai until parts of India and most of Central Asia. Persian would become the dominant language in here, but also Turkish as well as Arabic would become very important. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.